Okay, we are live again. Sorry for skipping last Friday. A lot is going on, including fires, and we were facing a little bit of a Armageddon here on the West Coast. So appreciate your patience. My name is Olga Bolotina. I am bringing to you In the Know, the series of conversation with environmental sustainability leaders, where they sharing their stories, their inspirations and their motivations for doing what they're doing and keeping strong during those crises. And hopefully you learn a lot. So today I'm very excited to introduce Wes, and we actually never met before. So I'm very excited to ask a lot of questions and get to know you, Wes. Well, I didn't even get your last name. So anyway, I am impromptu, but anyway, Wes is joining us from a little bit sort of, we're talking about environmental protection and also sustainability. There are a little bit sort of different aspect to that. So Wes joining us from the clean energy aspect and financing for clean energy and storage, which to me actually is very interesting subject, especially the storage aspect of it. So I'll just read briefly Wes's bio, and then we can launch into a lot of exciting things, which I'm very excited about talking about some of those aspects. So Wes is a finance manager with Pattern Energy Group based in San Francisco, California. He has spent the past 4 years working on finance transactions for wind, solar transmission, and storage projects across US, Mexico, Canada, and Japan. A lot of big span. Prior to Pattern, Wes worked in rotation program capacity at SunEdison. So rotation program capacity, I have a question about that. What does that mean? Prior to Pattern, Wes worked, and Wes also is an alumni for 2020 Clean Energy Leadership Institute in San Francisco. And thank you, Igor Tregub, for introducing us. Appreciate it. Also an alum of the same program. And I was really excited to find out, well, cycling is, you love cycling, Wes, so which is you can do now, but also improv comedy. I'm very excited to talk about that because I got a little bit of a taste of improv comedy last year, and I was just absolutely blown away. So I think it's an art, amazing art that is so relevant and well done. When it's well done, it's really captivating. So
yeah, that's the key though, right? It has to be well done. Otherwise, it's just really awkward for the entire audience.
well, take the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Just be able to find it. Well, thank you so much for joining today. Really, really appreciate it. So I'm always interested, and I think that, our childhood forms us quite a bit, and where, what we choose to do in life and who we choose to be really stems from our childhood, our upbringing. So if you can share a little bit, where you're from, what your childhood was like, sort of, and what brought you ultimately into working in sustainability and renewable energy. So that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Olga, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here speaking to all of you. So I was born in Philadelphia, but I actually spent most of my childhood growing up in Taipei, Taiwan, over in Asia. Both of my parents are physicians, and my grandfather is also a physician in Taipei. He's 90-something years old, and he's still practicing. It's ridiculous.
Great.
But growing up, growing up, it was a very classic, kind of East Asian upbringing of, very, very much focused on academics and academic success. My mother would constantly berate me for, you had to go to medical school, you had to go to, get a medical degree and become a doctor. In her mind, like that was like the one stable career path that ensured that you would be, set for life effectively. I never wanted to be a doctor. I, hated those conversations with my mother and my parents, but it definitely rubbed off on me in some ways. And growing up and going through high school, going into college, I knew that as a career, I wanted to do something that was mission driven, that wasn't just about, working 9 to 5, grabbing a paycheck and going home and relaxing. Like I wanted to do something that would, help others, hopefully a great number of people, even if they didn't recognize who was actually doing the help for them. Like, I wanted to do something in that vein. And I was also inherently just interested in the sciences growing up. So going into college, I decided to major in both chemistry and environmental sciences. And the goal was to kind of leverage that background in the hard sciences to find a career in, what turned out to be clean energy, but sustainability as a whole.
So why, mission driven, and resonates with me. I'm very much into sort of personal development constantly, but why mission driven? I mean, is it something that you talked with friends, or sort of recognizing that we live in those times that is like constantly, we really need to pay attention to what's going on in the world, and especially climate crisis and how it's going to affect us and future generations. So is that something that brought that mission-driven aspect, or some key people in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say again, it's very heavily influenced by my family. Growing up, my parents both worked really long hours, and they did it primarily to to make sure that their kids could have a relatively stable upbringing, and they would never want for anything or go hungry or anything like that. But I think another part of it was they were just super passionate about their jobs, and they were very passionate about helping people, even just random strangers. So I think I got a lot of that from them. And to me, it had never been a question of just wanting to look out for myself. That had never really crossed my mind as being sufficient in a career. I always wanted to do something that would mean something to somebody else, somewhere in the world. And, growing up and learning about the climate crisis, it just seemed like the biggest challenge that anyone could take on today. And it's a massive challenge to tackle, and it's definitely not going to be solved by any one person. But I knew that I wanted to raise my hand and join the fight as soon as I could.
If I may, what did you mentioned that your dad is physician. What does your mom do?
She's a pediatrician, so they went to the same medical university, and they work at the same hospital today. So yeah, growing up, there was a lot of talk about just patients and clinics and all that stuff.
Wow. Well, and I'm very big, and not too many people I think are talking about that, the intersection between human health and environmental health. I mean, I think we tend to separate those two. I hear a lot of conversations, human health, longevity, et cetera, and then sustainability, environmental protection. And I was like, there's a direct connection. Let's say that link. So hopefully now you're discussing those connections with your family. Are they still in Taipei, you said, or are they back?
They are, yeah.
Wow. How's it now during the COVID? Do you communicate with them? I'm assuming you cannot go visit, right?
Yeah, they're only letting like nationals into the country, and even then you have to self-quarantine for 2 weeks or so. Taiwan is one of the safest places in the world related to COVID. So even though they're both doctors and they're going into the hospital every day, I actually feel really good about it, because I know that they're safe and they don't need to worry about anything. The country's effectively reopened at this point. They're having like live concerts, they're having events outdoors. It's almost, back to normal. Part of that was the original SARS epidemic back in 2003, I want to say. We were there for that, and we got hit really hard. I remember like missing the last couple months of my 5th grade because everyone was quarantined at the time going into the summer. So we know what that's like, and we know the importance of public health. And so when this happened, we were ready for it.
Well, the importance of being ready. I also work in the local government. I was like, oh my God, we really need to write all of those protocols ahead of time to make sure we actually know what we're doing when the disaster, strikes. Is so important. And you know what, I think that United States, that's my observation, is not very good about going and sort of learning from other countries. And like in this particular case, or in any case, actually cross-pollination and learning from different cultures, different countries who already have experience in something, or for whatever reason managed something differently and better, I think is always very useful. So to that question, I mean, your work now actually spans different countries, which are very different. You know, Mexico and Japan, I'm assuming completely different cultures, different, you know, norms. So how do you navigate that? And how do you manage to manage so many continents?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's not easy. Thankfully, my involvement in each region is isolated to the one or two projects that I actually work on in each country. So I approach it very much from the ground up. Like, you know, fundamentally, a wind farm is a wind farm no matter where you build it in the world. But then you start layering on certain specific aspects of each country. Things like the tax regime is a little bit different. Culture of your joint venture partners in the country, you know, they have different holidays, they have different working protocols, they have different ways of communicating with people on a regular basis. And then you can zoom out even further to what I think are the more interesting points, which is, how is the federal government incentivizing renewables? Are they threatening the longevity of the renewables industry in Mexico or Japan, or is this a relatively stable government? And, you know, have they signed on to the Paris Climate Accords? Are they supportive of, you know, a renewable portfolio standard over the next 10 to 20 years? It's those kinds of things that, you know, as a finance person, you think about when you think of investing into geographies like that.
You know, can I don't want to get too much into politics potentially, but you know, everybody who knows me knows where I'm at in my politics.
Let's do it.
But well, you know, I'm actually interested because you are a specialist in that, and I'm genuinely interested in the United States, how the financing of renewable energy projects changed over the last, you know, several. Well, I would actually be interested in sort of all over the last 20 years. I know that you probably didn't work in renewable energy, you know, 20 years ago, but still you might have a better idea, because we had such a drastic changes, you know, Clinton, Bush, Obama, then you know, Trump. So it's just the country been sort of flipping flopping, and how did that reflect on the financing? And I think the bigger question is on the build out of renewable energy projects. So can you speak about that?
Yeah. So, and let me know if this is ever getting into the weeds too much, but I think the US has financed or incentivized the build out of renewables in a very different way than most other countries. If you look at Italy, Spain, Germany, they have approached it from a feed-in tariff mechanism. This is also what Japan is doing. And a feed-in tariff is basically the government will pay the project developer for every unit of renewable energy generated by that wind farm or solar farm. So it's a direct government subsidy. What ended up happening was that a lot of these countries underestimated just how much interest there would be in the build out of wind and solar, especially on the residential side. And so they undercommitted funds. They realized they were going way over budget based on these subsidies, and they had to roll back a lot of the incentives that they were giving to renewables. In certain cases, it almost bankrupted certain governments. And it's only now that the European Union, with much stronger sustainability goals, is revisiting that concept and seeing, you know, how else can they incentivize development of clean energy. In the US, and this is very similar to a bunch of other things that the US does, it's all based on tax structure. So instead of a direct government subsidy, which most people would find politically toxic or unappealing, they approached it from a, you know, if you are a large bank and you have, if you owe a lot of taxes in a certain year, your investment into renewable energy can offset those taxes that you would owe. This was good because it prevented the government from, you know, having to subsidize so many projects. It based the incentive on effectively supply and demand and the private sector, which is good for, I guess, capitalism. The downside of it was you kind of isolated the number of people who could invest in wind and solar to the large banks of the world. We're talking JP Morgan, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley. There's only a handful of banks out there that can take tax equity as a financing strategy. But it's worked over the past 10 to 20 years, or I guess 10 years or so. I forget when it was actually implemented. One of the things that I've found very interesting working in the wind industry is that the senator who actually proposed the production tax credit for wind is Republican. It's Senator Chuck Grassley. And upon further investigation, I'm starting to learn that like a lot of the projects built in the US, a lot of the wind and solar projects are located in Republican states because these are areas that are less populated, a lot of open field, a lot of great wind resource. And these wind projects in particular are huge sources of revenue for communities and populations that aren't exposed to the coastal, demographics or, big city life and those types of raging economies that you would see on the East Coast and in California. So it's becoming over the past few years, and now I think it's very much a bipartisan issue of wanting to invest in these projects. From the blue side, I guess it's more on the on the face of climate change and wanting to address environmental concerns. But there is a very large economic incentives for both Democrats and Republicans to want to invest further in wind and solar.
And I'm, of course, my mind is immediately goes, well, how can we marry those, and how can we just, when we put together a proposal, we always, list a lot of different, pros and cons, right? So how can we marry those? So it's like, and this and that, and that, and the social aspect that you also mentioned as a huge one, obviously, I think for, well, I think for both actually Republicans and Democrats, I think that not to go on a tangent, but I think that when we communicate a certain way, certain values, most of the people will agree to them. Do you want fresh water, good food, clean air? Everybody will say yes. I mean, do you want to go to beaches and not polluted with plastic? Or wherever, streams, lakes, everybody will say probably no. We don't want plastic pollution there. So I think that we need to find the language to actually merge and not allow evil corporations to sort of deviate the message. So, but is there a big development in California, and how is that dealt with here? Because obviously there's a lot of conversation about the offshore wind farms and inland, and also of course in sustainable in the environmental protection community, there's a lot of conversation about bird protection, which is extremely important, I think too. In my I have sustainable MBA from Presidio School of Graduate School, actually. So where we do, concentrate also a lot on the finance and social aspects and environment. But I feel like there's not enough conversation about biosystems and ecosystems and how, we talk about birds, oh, it's just birds. And it was like, no, birds eat insects. Insects, bite you and transmit diseases. And there's just a whole chain of biodiversity. So, but anyway, what are the systems in California, how are they managed, and what do you see the future sort of from finance standpoint and also environmental protection standpoint?
Sure, yeah. So California is an interesting place to develop renewables. It's becoming very hard actually because of NIMBYism. There's a lot of people here who are, it's very ironic. They're very supportive of renewable energy as a whole, but as soon as you tell them that they're going to be within eyeshot or earshot of a wind turbine, they say absolutely not. So it's actually made the real estate game in California very expensive. Just finding the land and a landowner who's willing to work with you to develop that renewable project, that's becoming very difficult. California also has a weak situation where, if you've ever heard of the duck curve, it's a phenomenon where we have, as a state, built out so much solar already that during the daytime, you have a ton of solar generation on the grid, which from a supply and demand perspective, pushes down your energy price to extreme lows. But that energy price goes back up in the evening when the sun sets and you're not generating enough solar. And then the grid is forced to spin up gas peaker plants, fossil thermal generation in order to meet the load as people come home and start turning on their stoves and, turning on lights, watching Netflix and whatever. So it's, and this is happening in certain other parts of the country where it's not just the number of, clean units of energy that you're delivering to the grid, it's when you're delivering it. In certain places, you have a ton of solar built out, which is good for half of the day, and it's not good for the other half of the day. In Texas, it's the exact opposite. There is a ton of wind spinning in the Texas Panhandle to the point where at night, when all that wind is blowing and there's nobody awake to use the energy, the grid in some cases will literally pay customers to take the energy off of their hands because the grid just becomes unstable by that much wind energy. So that's kind of the name of the game when you're looking at California. In terms of your question as to the regulatory and the environmental aspect, those are definite concerns both in California and just everywhere else in the U.S. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is an entity that we work with on a regular basis. A lot of the wind products we build, again, are in rural areas that tend to have a lot of sensitive avian populations. And so whenever we go in and look at a project, that typically involves a 1 to 2 year wildlife monitoring program to literally count the number of endangered species of eagles, or bats in some cases, that you see flying through the site. If it is an extremely sensitive area, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will require us to purchase a pretty expensive eagle take permit, which is kind of an allowance for eagle fatalities. It's not great. Like optimally, you would want to, install some types of technologies to prevent birds from flying through your project. And those types of technologies are becoming more ubiquitous in US-based wind projects now. But yeah, there's a pretty heavy consultation process with all environmental stakeholders. Obviously, local communities are consulted in certain cases. If kind of First Nations tribes or Native American tribes are involved, they are heavily consulted as well because we're building it on their land. And so there's a very large diligence process that goes behind all of that.
I know, I'm not an engineer, but my engineering brain is like, how can we put nets around those? It's like, so both insects and birds and not, but it's going to be completely different structure. But also, at one point, I'm actually also Russian, and I was interested in communicating with Russian people who are very good engineers and very good inventors traditionally. So they were showing all kinds of different wind turbines designs, which it seems like there are technologies out there that actually at least maybe not prevent completely, but minimize. Those are vertical turbines or so. Did you or other technologies, I'm completely ignorant in that, but other technologies that we could employ and could implement out there that minimize those losses of wildlife.
For wind turbines, it will involve I was reading a couple weeks ago that simply painting a turbine black significantly reduces the chances that an avian species will fly into the turbine. My guess is I actually don't know why they're painted white. My guess would be it's got something to do with heating and the absorption of solar rays, just making sure the turbine doesn't overheat. But there are very simple strategies like that. There are active mitigation strategies of supplanting trees that are close to the project and moving them further away, because those are the natural perch areas for golden eagles and bald eagles. In certain cases, there are upgrades to transmission lines to make sure that there are no voltage scenarios that could electrocute a bird that lands on the cable. And then there are, I wouldn't say supersonic, but there are sonic methods of deterring wildlife from entering the project area, just like certain frequencies of sound that humans can't necessarily hear unless they're very close, but are more prevalent for avian species to detect. So those are some of the technologies and strategies that we've been hearing as mitigation strategies.
Well, and I'm obviously curious as like how serious people are taking those and how much they implement those.
It is very heavily regulated. It's one of the things that U.S. Fish and Wildlife has done very well, even despite everything that Trump is saying and the federal government is saying. These standards of protecting endangered species are very important to the U.S. government, whether it's avian species or, as we get into offshore wind on the East Coast and West Coast, marine mammals, and making sure that whales don't get tied up in subsea cable, that we're not endangering, species of fish that could be endangered in those areas. Yeah, it's taken very seriously.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was like, we're talking about endangered species. I was like, the UN came out with a report just last year, that the is a real crisis in all kinds of ecosystems. The ecosystems are basically collapsing at the unprecedented rates all over the world. So I was like, well, how many endangered species we're going to have pretty soon? Not talking even about ourselves. I don't know, people are separating, but I know the population is really large, but it was like, where are we heading? So but anyway, we're concentrating on the wind, and of course there's offshore. It's like I'm actually very interested myself, so that's why I want to learn more. But you mentioned also obviously a huge problem, and it's been in the conversation. I was like for years, for generations now, how to create a good storage for energy, because that's huge part of the puzzle. If we can store energy and distribute and during the off hours, then we don't need those power plants, maybe, hopefully, anymore. So what are the technologies, and how hopeful you are that they are going to be actually used and implemented widely?
Hmm. Yeah, so the big one that everyone talks about today is lithium-ion battery storage. These are the batteries that Tesla installs in their cars. They also use it for stationary storage. Panasonic, LG Chem, there's a bunch of just electronics manufacturers who probably manufacture the same laptops that you and I use. They are getting into the large-scale stationary storage market now and supplying these batteries for utility scale energy storage. Um, I think that's a very large opportunity, and I think there is a very large part of the decarbonization conversation that will come from like electronic battery storage. I don't think it will be the entire story per se. The big drawback about lithium-ion technology is, well, we're waiting for the costs to come down, and they will come down. But for electric battery storage, the more energy you want to store, the larger the system needs to be. This is different from gas storage because you can have a tank, but you can also compress the gas that you want to store at different pressures, and you can inherently store more energy in that method. And there are certain applications where the scale of the energy you want to store is just so large that lithium ion just doesn't make sense. So you don't have enough space in order to store all that energy. So there are a lot of alternatives. Most of them are not commercial yet, but I would expect them to become commercial in the next 10 years. So we're talking about hydrogen production, using hydrogen as a green molecule, storing it in a large underground salt cavern, and using that as a seasonal energy storage method. So instead of, for example, waiting until the winter time and then figuring out what your energy supply is going to be day to day, literally storing a bunch of green molecules underground and then utilizing those green molecules when winter comes about for heating purposes or additional electricity demand that's going to come onto the grid. There's that. There is renewable natural gas, which has its pros and cons, but should be net zero on a CO2 basis.
Like, no.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're very, I would say, intuitional solutions as well. There's gravity storage. Literally, you can move a bunch of bricks up to the top of a mountain on a set of rail tracks, and then you can literally let gravity do the work, pull all those bricks down, use that kinetic energy to turn a turbine, and you can generate electricity like that. It's not that much different from a hydro dam. And I think those solutions are implemented in some areas of Scandinavia or Northern Europe. So there's a lot of solutions out there. I think based on your geography, the market, the government, different solutions will work in different areas. Lithium ion is the sexiest and most popular right now, but it's not the entire story.
Wow, I'm having an image stack of bricks going out, not drop down, but obviously I understand that. But I was like, well, but then you have to get bricks up again, and that takes energy. So what is the conversion or exchange between one another, and how much is left over to actually use in the grid? But that's technology that I haven't heard about genuinely, so I'm very curious about actually looking. I was like, I want to see it, especially in Scandinavia. Well, I guess I don't know how many mountains they have or hills. So like, But hydrogen, something we talked about. One of the Sierra Club leaders, Chris Peoples, is also working for AC Transit. He's one of the board directors, and he's been pushing the hydrogen fuel cells for quite some time. So AC Transit is employing that technology. But also, I'm curious. Have you heard of biomimicry?
I've heard the term. I'm unfamiliar with the concept.
It's basically looking at how nature is doing things, for lack of more scientific description, and basically learning from nature how to implement it, like looking at the butterfly wings and look how it reflects, why the colors are created. It's not just because the wing is colored, it's how it reflects the light. So implementing technology from nature, basically. So I would be interested. In my mind immediately went like, well, how nature stores energy and uses energy. So that would be definitely. I mean, I hope somebody's looking into it. And another question in my mind is, because I'm curious naturally in life cycle analysis and life cycle of anything that we use. So lithium-ion, how lithium is mined, and is it sustainable, and what is the payoffs and externalities of using that technology versus another. So I don't know, maybe you can speak to that, because I actually am curious, what are the environmental impacts of mining lithium and how it's mined? Do you know? Even I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with how it's mined. I know it is physically mined. That's the most common way of extracting lithium. And there are definite environmental impacts associated with it. If you think about strip mining, literally carving out the side of a mountain, I'm sure the lithium industry is no stranger to
Up
that
in
issue.
mountains, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
saying.
so
Mm-hmm.
I actually do have a friend who has focused on this for his career of alternate ways of extracting lithium from, I guess, alternate resources. Um, and I won't speak about it too much because it's somewhat proprietary information, but lithium can be found in brine pools in Argentina and elsewhere, and there are ways of basically evaporating off the solvent in that situation and just leaving the pure lithium ions or atoms that you can then harvest for manufacturing. So these
I'm
are,
so sorry, you said in Argentina they can be, how can you get it?
yeah, these are brine pools. So these are naturally
Fine.
occurring, pools of water, like of salt water, but part of the salt is lithium. Um, and there's a growing emphasis on tapping these resources instead of just strip mining a mountain, literally just going to the brine pools, evaporating off the solvent, and harvesting the lithium for production. And that is seen as a much less environmentally hazardous way of producing lithium. I'm not sure what the yields are, and I'm not sure how scalable it will be relative to the way conventional lithium is mined, but there are alternate ways to do it.
Yeah. Well, and also my mind again going to reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce probably is very important. I know it's not good for capitalism or for business, but I think it's definitely good for business if you really thinking long term, and how you can renew resources instead of stripping them. So fascinating technologies. I mean, and how you deal with it in Mexico also. And you talked a little bit about Japan, but Mexico is, in my mind, it was like that's also a completely different world of regulations. And so how do you deal in Mexico with renewable energy? How they deal with renewable energy there? That's a better question, I guess.
Yeah, Mexico is very difficult, especially right now. There was a lot of progress that happened in 2013 when they basically revamped their entire electricity grid structure. Prior to that, Mexico split up in a number of states, and each state had their own way of regulating their electricity market. In 2013, they passed a law to bring all those grids together, create one general wholesale market for electricity. Based on a nodal system. So it's very similar to the way the US trades energy today. And there was a lot of very favorable policy in the way of promoting renewable energy. The problem is that in 2017, they elected their current president. He goes by AMLO, or most people call him AMLO. I forget what the actual abbreviation is, but he is very anti-private sector. And he is effectively right now doing everything he can to dissuade people from investing in renewables, because a lot of that was based on federal subsidies to private companies to install those projects. So it's not a very stable government, or it's not a very favorable policy regime to invest in renewables in Mexico today. Hopefully that changes in the future, because obviously Mexico has a tremendous solar resource. They also have great wind resources, and they're a pretty populated country. I mean, they have a lot of demand for that energy, and if it can come from renewables, that'd be great. Right now they're using a lot of oil-fired and natural gas-fired power plants, which is definitely not good for the environment, and it doesn't look like they're stopping anytime soon. So
it seems like we can talk about each country separately for hours, but you also mentioned transmission. So you probably know about projects, the local projects, the Clean Energy Alliance and clean energy build out locally. What do you see the benefits of that, and maybe some shortcomings, versus solar farms, wind farms? Any observation from the business standpoint, from financing standpoint, and just in general? What do you think?
yeah, I think especially long distance, high voltage transmission lines, those are absolutely going to be part of the solution to climate change. Over the past 10, 20 years, a lot of the good projects that you can develop close to cities and load centers, those have already been built out. And so if you want to build a valuable project, you have to find areas where the resource is strong, but aren't necessarily close to load. And how you deliver that energy is obviously through long distance transmission. This is somewhat solved if you have a national electricity market and you can trade energy from one state to the next. Think about New Mexico energy generation being traded all the way to California without the need for that type of transmission infrastructure. But absent of that, and even if we do have that type of market structure, you do need someone to go in and build these transmission cables so that the energy can physically flow from one place to another. The federal government in the US is notorious for preventing infrastructure like that from being built. In the 60s, the government, financed a lot of the highway build out, a build out of the electricity grid as we know it today. And then they basically said, okay, this is good. We're going to stop investing in this infrastructure. Well, now that we're changing our generation sources, a whole bunch of other issues are coming to the fore. And so there's been a lot of, I would say, inertia in looking at that side of the equation. I think we're doing a good job investing in the generation side, but transmission and distribution, require further attention and a lot more investment.
That's so interesting. It's one of those moments of like when you speak to a person and they give you completely different answer than you expected. Because I have to say, not only I visually do not like those lines, but also my constant is like, I live in Oakland and I'm looking just out of my window right now. It's like there are very few solar panels on the roofs, and it's definitely, I feel like there's so much potential to build infrastructure where it's most needed and used. So to me, it's almost goes to what kind of laws and regulations and incentives we can build into providing that on point solar and wind. I mean, wind is probably more complicated because the noise and but the solar, it seems to me that really has to be built in the urban centers. Another aspect of it, I mean, I'm an environmentalist. I really do love the birds and the bees and the turtles. So we traditionally, I think, look at, let's say, desert. Oh, it's empty space. Well, it's empty to us maybe, but there are thousands of species that are absolutely not only fascinating to learn about about their adaptation to those extreme conditions, but just, as an ecosystem, it has value and actually contributes to us. Maybe not, we don't see it directly, but nevertheless it does, so so to me, it's a struggle between, yes, we need to curb climate change very fast and drastically in a short period of time. And also, I was like, well, we also need to protect the biodiversity and create that, increase the value in our own minds of all ecosystems in the world. So that struggle for me. So I hear you on infrastructure in general and the necessity to build big projects, just because the level of crisis that we're in. And at the same time, it's like, well, we need to, in my opinion, keep in mind that we need to value our nature. So anyway, but it's definitely a long conversation. And I think that to your earlier points, I think that you need to think about the incentives and how do you bring things into the market, into the space, and how the longevity of it. So.
Yeah. I mean, just on that point, I think there are solutions, right? I mean, you can Google these, but there have been articles that show that if you literally designated like a massive area in the Saharan desert in Africa, or a huge tract of open space, unpopulated space in Texas, you could supply a whole country's worth or the whole continent's worth of energy. I think there are opportunities to do that. It's just the fact that we are building these large projects not in one aggregated area, but dispersed throughout the country. So I agree with you. There needs to be some type of balance between ecological preservation and the need to decarbonize our energy sector. And obviously we have very little time to do it. So we had to kind of keep eyes on both balls at the same time.
Yeah, that's true. And if you can speak about decarbonization a little bit, because most of the people who are probably listening are very familiar with this term, but maybe you can just speak a little bit about that. So.
Yeah. The International Energy Agency, I think it's them, they have a really good, very complicated chart of where all greenhouse gas emissions come from in the US. I would definitely refer to that, but decarbonization as a whole is the concept of displacing fossil fuel generation, or fossil fuel sources that emanate carbon dioxide, methane, CFCs into the atmosphere, and replacing those sources of generation or technology with clean sources like wind and solar. Most of the headlines that you'll read today are centered on power generation, the electricity sector, as well as transportation. Everyone hears a lot about Tesla and now Nikola, Workhorse, all these other electric vehicle startups that are looking to change the transportation sector. There's a very large part of the conversation that's not being addressed in its entirety. Things like residential and commercial heating, that's very carbon intensive as well. The manufacturing of cement and steel both produce a ton of carbon emissions. The manufacturing of ammonia for agricultural purposes as well. And these are areas that we don't have the solutions to just yet. The technology might exist, but it's not commercialized, it's not scalable. And people are working on doing that. I think one good example of a great step forward is the European Union's plan to build back better under their Green Deal. Is a large component of it is investment into hydrogen and a green hydrogen economy. Hydrogen can be used to manufacture cement in lieu of methane. It can be used for steel production. It can be used for heating. It can be used for a lot of these things that just wind and solar energy can't do. And if you pair them together, you can do things like seasonal energy storage, or literally just producing green hydrogen for a network of hydrogen pumps for vehicles. I mean, the opportunities are endless, but there's a lot of research that still needs to be involved, and obviously a lot of policy that needs to go in behind it.
And I keep coming back to again, it's like I went to Presidio 10 years ago, and all of those technologies were talked about, including biofuels, also not biofuels from palm oil, but biofuels, I mean, from reused oil or from used oil or from algae, algae farms. We didn't even touch on that because that's potentially a huge source of energy, or, landfills that we just, throwing food scraps onto, that could be a huge resource, not only of methane, that could be actually produced clean way, right? Not just mined, but actually extracted from or recycled from food scraps, and also compost that could be used. So anyway, there's just so many potential, and I think it just takes the will and the recognition from governments, really, that we need incentives that promote build out of those energies and research that needs to go into it, and also policies that incentivize that. It's like I feel like there's just so much education that needs to happen on all levels to bring those policies. Well, this has been very nitty gritty, technology intense conversation. But I'm curious about your participation in the Clean Energy Leadership Institute. What did you? Is it just a network of people who are all involved in clean energy, or what are the things that you learned, and what are the things that you sort of carrying forward from it?
Yeah, absolutely. This is my opportunity to give a huge shout out to the CLI program. But yeah, the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, they've been around for 5 to 6 years now. They started out in DC as a way for professionals who are already working in the renewable space, or folks who wanted to break into it from a different industry. It was a network that they wanted to establish to kind of share expertise and also get people together every week to talk with experts in the field. So it is currently kind of a 3 to 4 month program, 35 people. We have chapters in San Francisco, DC, and Chicago, and we're looking to expand to places like New York City, Houston, and elsewhere. But it's become a very strong network. There's been people who have gone through the program who have ended up, starting their own companies in geothermal or doing some otherwise like very, very interesting things. And I think the other interesting aspect is people come to it from different backgrounds. In my cohort, we had a number of people coming in from the software engineering space, and they really cared about climate change, so they wanted to learn more about how they could make an impact. There were people who had prior experience in oil and gas and realized that thermal generation isn't the wave of the future. It's going to be renewables. How can I get involved there? And so you have this diverse mix of backgrounds and expertise all coming together and talking about very detailed, very nerdy topics about clean energy and sustainability. We also have started talking a lot more about diversity and inclusion in the renewable space, which is definitely not talked about enough, and just overall equity in the decarbonization story. So, I mean, I can't say enough good things about CLI. The person who invited me to this panel, or who introduced me to this panel, was from CLI, and a lot of my good friends today are all from that program. So.
CLI is the Clean Energy Leadership Institute.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Abbreviations, I love them, but I love and hate them. Wow, that's fascinating. And of course, that now I'm like, wow, I should look into that institute. I'm curious. I'm trying to stay sort of more on the, because I'm obviously curious in all the energy and engineering and finance and and the clean energy distribution, and just naturally kind of gravitating also towards that. But I was like, well, you know what, we can change the technology and leadership and elected officials and laws and regulations. And I'm arriving to this realization more and more that unless we change, our mind, body, soul, mentality, I don't think much will change. I'm just looking at, so if Obama did so much, good work on sustainability, and then, Trump comes and it just, slashes all of those laws, that's going to have consequences for generations to come. So it's like, how do we change the dialogue? How we change our perception? How do we learn to critically think and analyze what is good, and also incorporate biology, physiology, human health, nature, and all of those natural laws and also conversation about animals and birds and bees and flora and fauna, how they, as equal partners and equal representatives sort of at the table. So to me, it's immensely important. So anyway, I would be completely remiss if I didn't talk about the improv comedy.
Oh God. I was hoping you would skip that one.
No, I don't want to skip that one because it's important, especially in tough times. I was like, your hobbies sustain you. So tell me a little bit about how did you get into it and what did you do?
Oh gosh. Yeah, so when I was growing up in Taiwan, again, it was the environment of, you have to work on academic success and whatever. My outlet for that was I did theater for 4 years of high school, and it was one of the best decisions I made in my life, is getting involved with this really crazy group of people who did stuff that weren't necessarily going to do for a career, but they just enjoyed, making fun of each other and going up on stage and just pretending to be someone else, and that really stuck with me, I think. So when I graduated college and came out to the Bay Area, it was one of the things where like I kind of wanted to pick up a hobby, not just work 24 hours a day. And I started looking for opportunities to perform in improv. And so over the past year or so, I've been taking classes and in some cases doing shows in San Francisco. I won't say I'm any good. I definitely am carried by the groups that I'm paired with, and they're all really funny people, so I'm funny by association. But yeah, unfortunately with COVID, improv hasn't really been a thing, but I'm definitely looking to get back into it soon.
Now, so do you do anything on Zoom at all, or try to do anything on Zoom or not?
It's a little tough to do improv on Zoom, especially when you have kind of a delay. There are also, I guess there are some people who I know who have tried to do like stand-up nights, which is a little bit different than improv. But yeah, without a live audience and without actually being there in person, it's got a different feel, it's just a little more difficult.
Yeah. I, as I mentioned to you, I also grew up actually doing theater. I grew up in Russia, but we had English speaking theater in my school, so it was always a great interest of mine. And then when I came to the United States, I also participated in, it's very Russian thing, but it's sort of like human theater combined and improv, so it's just a little bit of parts of everything. It's a game, so to speak. It was broadly televised, and it's just really different teams competing in like 3 different areas: the prepare homework, where they sort of perform a scene, and then there's a question asked, and then you have to come up with improv answer, and it's all judged on how funny it is and how creative and how funny. So yeah, I did that several years actually in the United States, which was a lot of fun. And then just last year I was introduced to improv theater, and I was absolutely blown away, and I actually loved it to participate in, and not just to watch. Watching is, we talk about it when it's done well. Oh my God, it's so just mind-blowing how creative people are, and how sharp and how fast their reactions are, and everything is playing off each other, and energy and just moves even is like that is so impressive. Well, I hope you're gonna get it back into it. Is there something that you wish I would have asked you, or something that you want to share with people, some things that you think is important for people to take out of our conversation, or just in general to think about as they go about their daily lives?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was hoping you wouldn't touch upon the comedy side of things, but we've already crossed that bridge.
Why not? Why did you not want to talk about it? I'm just curious.
Oh no, it's not happening right now. I don't think I'm necessarily that funny. I'm definitely out of practice, but I mean,
well, let us be the judge of it. We're always our own worst critics. So next year, hopefully, fingers crossed, when everything opens up, I am expecting to be invited.
Yeah, I'll invite you to the show of audience of 5 people in some dingy bar in the Mission. I'll
Hey,
let you know.
I'm in. I'm totally in. Totally in.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I'll kind of leave with everyone, I do think that there will come a point in time, hopefully in the near future, where the majority of people in the world will be focused on climate change as both their, a focus of their career or just something that they really care about in the realm of day-to-day life or politics or whatnot. I think the challenge is only getting more urgent and more dire every day. I mean, you look at, the hurricanes in the south, the wildfires in the west. This is only going to get worse. And I think a lot of people will start to catch on that this should be the #1 priority for everyone for the next 20, 30 years or so. And it's only a question of when, it's not a question of if. I would say if you're interested in getting into sustainability, there's a ton of opportunity to get involved. You don't need to be a finance guy like me. You don't need to be an environmentalist or an ecologist. There's room for everyone to come in and support in your own ways. And I'd say a really good way to start doing that is just start having conversations with people. Tap your university networks, talk to someone who you know is working in this space, get to know them, get to know their story, and start to get some opinions about how you can contribute, because we're all going to need the help.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And I also agree that it boils down really to personal action and personal choice, and it really personal choice in everything. What do you buy at the store? How do you get to the store? What choices in electricity and communications you make. I mean, it really boils down to everything. So just when you go about your daily life, just raise your awareness, raise your critical thinking. It's like, why am I buying this thing versus that thing? Well, this is not wrapped in plastic. This is. Well, plastic comes from fossil fuels. Maybe I don't want to contribute to fossil fuel economy, so maybe I should buy that one. So anyway, educate yourself. I absolutely agree with you, and raise your awareness. Yeah.
And vote in November. Vote in November.
Vote in November. Oh my God. Jesus. I cannot vote, but everybody who can vote, vote, and call and write to your friends in especially other states. I'm not going to call the number out, the color of the states out, but hey, call and call and write to your friends and people that you know. Yes,
yeah.
Wes, such a pleasure. Thank you so much. So educational. I really appreciate our conversation. I genuinely hope we stay in touch, because I would love to go to your comedy in the dingy bar in San Francisco. That's totally fine. And also learn more about all the things that we talked about just now. So thank you so much. If you can stay with us just for 1 second, we do a little debrief. And for everybody who watched and listened to us, thank you so much. Thank you for your continuing interest in topics of sustainability, environmental protection. As Wes said, those topics are probably going to be intensified in all spheres of life all over the globe. So thank you for being, one of the first waves of people who are interested and are doing active work all the time to save our environment and to save ourselves, really. So thank you so much for joining, and until further ado, until next Friday, see you at 12 next Friday. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys.